Good evening from Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. I'm Bob Schieffer of CBS News. I want to welcome you to the third and last of the 2004 debates between President George Bush and Senator John Kerry. As Jim Lira told you before the first one, these debates are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Tonight, the topic will be domestic affairs, but the format will be the same as that first debate. I'll moderate our discussion under detailed rules agreed to by the candidates. But the questions and the areas to be covered were chosen by me. I have not told the candidates or anyone else what they are. To refresh your memory on the rules, I will ask a question. The candidate is allowed 2 minutes to answer. His opponent then has a minute and a half to offer a rebuttal. At my discretion, I can extend the discussion by offering each candidate an additional 30 seconds. A green light will come on to signal the candidate has 30 seconds left. A yellow light signals 15 seconds left. A red light means 5 seconds left. There is also a buzzer if it is needed. The candidates may not question each other directly. There are no opening statements, but there will be 2-minute closing statements. There is an audience here tonight, but they have agreed to remain silent, except for right now, when they join me in welcoming President George Bush and Senator John Kerry. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. By coin toss, the first question goes to Senator Kerry. Senator, I want to set the stage for this discussion by asking the question that I think hangs over all of our politics today and is probably on the minds of many people watching this debate tonight, and that is, will our children and grandchildren ever live in a world as safe and secure as the world in which we grew up?
Well, first of all, Bob, thank you for moderating tonight. Thank you, Arizona State, for welcoming us. And thank you to the Presidential Commission for undertaking this enormous task. We're proud to be here. Mr. President, I'm glad to be here with you again to share similarities and differences with the American people. Will we ever be safe and secure again? Yes, we absolutely must be. That's the goal. Now, how do we achieve it is the most critical component of it. I believe that this president, regrettably, rushed us into a war, made decisions about foreign policy, pushed alliances away, and as a result, America is now bearing this extraordinary burden where we are not as safe as we ought to be. The measurement is not, are we safer? The measurement is, are we as safe as we ought to be? And there are a host of options that this president had available to him, like making sure that at all our ports in America, containers are inspected. Only 95% of them, 95% come in today uninspected. That's not good enough. People who fly on airplanes today, the cargo hold is not x-rayed, but the baggage is. That's not good enough. Firehouses don't have enough firefighters in them. Police officers are being cut from the streets of America because the president decided to cut the COPS program. So we can do a better job of Homeland Security. I can do a better job of waging a smarter, more effective war on terror and guarantee that we go after the terrorists. I will hunt them down and we'll kill them, we'll capture them, we'll do whatever necessary to be safe. But I pledge this to you, America. I will do it in the way that Franklin Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan and John Kennedy and others did, where we build the strongest alliances, where the world joins together, where we have the best intelligence, and where we are able ultimately to be more safe and secure.
Mr. President, you have 90 seconds.
Bob, thank you very much. I want to thank Arizona State as well. Yes, we can be safe and secure if we stay on the offense against the terrorists and if we spread freedom and liberty around the world. I have got a comprehensive strategy to not only chase down al-Qaeda wherever it exists, and we're making progress. Three-quarters of al-Qaeda leaders have been brought to justice, but to make sure that countries who harbor terrorists are held to account As a result of securing ourselves and ridding the Taliban out of Afghanistan, the Afghan people had elections this weekend. And the first voter was a 19-year-old woman. Think about that. Freedom is on the march. We held to account a terrorist regime in Saddam Hussein. In other words, in order to make sure we're secure, there must be a comprehensive plan. My opponent just this weekend talked about how terrorism can be reduced to a nuisance, comparing it to prostitution and illegal gambling. I think that attitude and that point of view is dangerous. I don't think you can secure America for the long run if you don't have a comprehensive view as to how to defeat these people. At home, we'll do everything we can to protect the homeland. I signed the Homeland Security Bill to better align our assets and resources. My opponent voted against it. We're doing everything we can to protect our borders and ports. But absolutely we can be secure in the long run. It just takes good, strong leadership.
Anything to add, Senator Kerry?
Yes. When the president had an opportunity to capture or kill Osama bin Laden, he took his focus off of him, outsourced the job to Afghan warlords, and Osama bin Laden escaped. 6 months after he said Osama bin Laden must be caught dead or alive, this president was asked, "Where's Osama bin Laden?" He said, "I don't know. I don't really think about him very much. I'm not that concerned." We need a president who stays deadly focused on the real war on terror.
Mr. President.
Gosh, I don't think I ever said I'm not worried about Osama bin Laden. That's kind of one of those exaggerations. Of course we're worried about Osama bin Laden. We're on the hunt after Osama bin Laden. We're using every asset at our disposal to get Osama bin Laden. My opponent said this war is a matter of intelligence and law enforcement. No, this is a war is a matter of using every asset at our disposal to keep the American people protected.
New question, Mr. President, to you. We're talking about protecting ourselves from the unexpected, but the flu season is suddenly upon us. Flu kills thousands of people every year. Suddenly we find ourselves with a severe shortage of flu vaccine. How did that happen?
Bob, we were reliant upon a company out of England to provide about half of the flu vaccines for the United States citizen, and it turned out that the vaccine they were producing was contaminated. And so we took the right action and didn't allow contaminated medicine into our country. We're working with Canada to hopefully that they'll help us realize the vaccine necessary to make sure our citizens have got flu vaccinations during this upcoming season. My call to our fellow Americans is, if you're healthy, if you're younger, don't get a flu shot this year. Help us prioritize those who need to get the flu shot, the elderly and the young. The CDC, responsible for health in the United States, is setting those priorities and is allocating the flu vaccine accordingly. I haven't gotten a flu shot, and I don't intend to, because I want to make sure that those who are most vulnerable get treated. We have a problem with litigation in the United States of America. Vaccine manufacturers are worried about getting sued, and so therefore they have backed off from providing this kind of vaccine. One of the reasons I'm such a strong believer in legal reform is so that people aren't afraid of producing a product that is necessary for the health of our citizens and then end up getting sued in a court of law. But the best thing we can do now, Bob, given the circumstances with the company in England, is for those of us who are younger and healthy, don't get a flu shot.
Senator Kerry?
This really underscores the problem with the American healthcare system. It's not working for the American family. And it's gotten worse under President Bush over the course of the last years. 5 million Americans have lost their health insurance in this country. You got about 1 million right here in Arizona, just shy, 950,000 who have no health insurance at all. 82,000 Arizonians lost their health insurance under President Bush's watch. 223,000 kids in Arizona have no health insurance at all. All across our country, go to Ohio, 1.4 million Ohioans have no health insurance. 114,000 of them lost it under President Bush. Wisconsin, 82,000 Wisconsinites lost it under President Bush. This president has turned his back on the wellness of America. And there is no system. In fact, it's starting to fall apart, not because of lawsuits, though they are a problem, and John Edwards and I are committed to fixing them, but because of the larger issue that we don't cover Americans. Children across our country don't have health care. We're the richest country on the face of the planet, the only industrialized nation in the world not to do it. I have a plan to cover all Americans. We're going to make it affordable and accessible. We're going to let everybody buy into the same health care plan senators and congressmen give themselves.
Mr. President, would you like to add something?
I would, thank you. I want to remind people listening tonight that a plan is not a litany of complaints. And a plan is not to lay out programs that you can't pay for. He just said he wants everybody to be able to buy into the same plan that senators and congressmen get. That costs the government $7,700 per family. If every family in America signed up, like the senator suggested, it would cost us $5 trillion over 10 years. It's an empty promise. It's called bait and switch.
Time's up.
Thank you.
Actually, it's not an empty promise. It's really interesting because the president used that very plan as a reason for seniors to accept his prescription drug plan. He said if it's good enough for the congressmen and senators to have choice, seniors ought to have choice. What we do is we have choice. I choose Blue Cross Blue Shield. Other senators, other congressmen choose other programs. But the fact is we're going to help Americans be able to buy into it. Those that can afford it are going to buy in themselves. We're not giving this away for nothing.
All right. Senator Kerry, a new question. Let's talk about economic security. You pledged during the last debate that you would not raise taxes on those making less than $200,000 a year. But the price of everything is going up, and we all know it. Healthcare costs, as you all are talking about, is skyrocketing, the cost of the war. My question is, how can you or any president, whoever is elected next time, keep that pledge without running this country deeper into debt and passing on more of the bills that we're running up to our children?
I'll tell you exactly how I can do it. By reinstating what President Bush took away, which is called pay-as-you-go. During the 1990s, we had pay-as-you-go rules. If you're going to pass something in the Congress, you have to show where you're going to pay for it and how. President Bush has he's the only president in history to do this. He's also the only president since in 72 years to lose jobs. 1.6 million jobs lost. He's the only president to have incomes of families go down for the last 3 years. The only president to see exports go down. The only president to see the lowest level of business investment in our country as it is today. Now, I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to change that. We're going to restore the fiscal discipline we had in the 1990s. Every plan that I have laid out, my health care plan, my plan for education, my plan for kids to be able to get better college loans, I've shown exactly how I'm going to pay for those. And we don't do it exclusively, but we start by rolling back George Bush's unaffordable tax cut for the wealthiest people earning more than $200,000 a year, and we pass, hopefully, the McCain-Kerry Commission, which identified some $60 billion that we can get. We shut the loophole, which has American workers actually subsidizing the loss of their own job. They just passed an expansion of that loophole in the last few days. $43 billion of giveaways, including favors to the oil and gas industry and to people importing ceiling fans from China. I'm going to stand up and fight for the American worker, and I'm going to do it in a way that's fiscally sound. I show how I pay for the health care, how we pay for the education. I have a manufacturing jobs credit. We pay for it by shutting that loophole overseas. We raise the student loans. I pay for it by changing the relationship with the banks. This president has never once vetoed one bill, first president in 100 years not to do that.
Mr. President.
Well, his rhetoric doesn't match his record. He'd been a senator for 20 years. He voted to increase taxes 98 times. When they tried to reduce taxes, he voted against that 127 times. He talks about being a fiscal conservative or fiscally sound, but he voted 277 times to waive the budget caps, which would have cost the taxpayers $4.2 trillion. He talks about pay-go. I tell you what pay-go means when you're a senator from Massachusetts. When you're a colleague of Ted Kennedy, pay-go means you pay, and he goes ahead and spends. He's proposed $2.2 trillion of new spending, and yet the so-called tax on the rich, which is also a tax on many small business owners in America, raises $600 million by our account, $800 billion by his account. There is a tax gap. And guess who usually ends up filling the tax gap? The middle class. I proposed a detailed budget, Bob. I send up my budget man to the Congress, and he says, here's how we're going to reduce the deficit in half by 5 years. It requires pro-growth policies that grow our economy and fiscal sanity in the halls of Congress.
Let's go to a new question, Mr. President, 2 minutes, and let's continue on jobs. You know, there are all kinds of statistics out there, but I want to bring it down to an individual. Mr. President, what do you say to someone in this country who has lost his job to someone overseas who's being paid a fraction of what that job paid here in the United States?
I say, Bob, I've got policies to continue to grow our economy and create the jobs of the 21st century. And here's some help for you to go get an education. Here's some help for you to go to a community college. We've expanded trade adjustment assistance. We want to help pay for you to gain the skills necessary to fill the jobs of the 21st century. You know, there's a lot of talk about how to keep the economy growing. We talk about fiscal matters. But perhaps the best way to keep jobs here in America and to keep this economy growing is to make sure our education system works. I went to Washington to solve problems, and I saw a problem in the public education system in America. They were just shuffling too many kids through the system, year after year, grade after grade, without learning the basics. And so we said, let's raise the standards. We're spending more money, but let's raise the standards and measure early and solve problems now before it's too late. You know, education is how to help the person who's lost a job. Education is how to make sure this, we've got a workforce that's productive and competitive. I've got 4 more years. I've got more to do to continue to raise standards, to continue to reward teachers in school districts that are working, to emphasize math and science in the classrooms, to continue to expand Pell Grants, to make sure that people have an opportunity to start their career with a college diploma. And so to the person you talk to, I say, here's some help. Here's some trade adjustment assistance money for you to go to a community college in your neighborhood, a community college which is providing the skills necessary to fill the jobs of the 21st century. And that's what we'd say to that person.
Senator Kerry.
I want you to notice how the president switched away from jobs and started talking about education principally. Let me come back in one moment to that, but I want to speak for a second, if I can, to what the president said about fiscal responsibility. Being lectured by the president on fiscal responsibility is a little bit like Tony Soprano talking to me about law and order in this country. This president has taken a $5.6 trillion surplus and turned it into deficits as far as the eye can see. Health care costs for the average American have gone up 64%. Tuitions have gone up 35%. Gasoline prices up 30%. Medicare premiums went up 17% a few days ago. Prescription drugs are up 12% a year. But guess what, America? The wages of Americans have gone down. The jobs that are being created in Arizona right now paying about $13,700 less than the jobs that we're losing. And the president just walks on by this problem. The fact is that he's cut job training money. $1 billion was cut. They only added a little bit back this year because it's an election year. They've cut the Pell Grants and the Perkins loans to help kids be able to go to college. They've cut the training money. They've wound up not even extending unemployment benefits and not even extending health care to those people who are unemployed. I'm going to do those things because that's what's right in America. Help workers to transition in every respect.
New question to you, Senator Kerry, 2 minutes, and it's still on jobs. You know, many experts say that a president really doesn't have much control over jobs. For example, if someone invents a machine that does the work of 5 people, that's progress. That's not the president's fault. So I ask you, is it fair to blame the administration entirely for this loss of jobs?
I don't blame them entirely for it. I blame the president for the things the president could do that has an impact on it. outsourcing is going to happen. I've acknowledged that in union halls across the country. I've had shop stewards stand up and say, will you promise me you're going to stop all this outsourcing? And I've looked them in the eye and I've said, no, I can't do that. What I can promise you is that I will make the playing field as fair as possible. That I will, for instance, make certain that with respect to the tax system, that you as a worker in America are not subsidizing the loss of your job. Today, if you're an American business, you actually get a benefit for going overseas. You get to defer your taxes. So if you're looking at a competitive world, you say to yourself, hey, I do better overseas than I do here in America. That's not smart. I don't want American workers subsidizing the loss of their own job, and when I'm president, we're going to shut that loophole in a nanosecond, and we're going to use that money to lower corporate tax rates in America for all corporations, 5%, and we're going to have a manufacturing jobs credit and a job hiring credit, so we actually help people be able to hire here. The second thing that we can do is provide a fair trade playing field. This president didn't stand up for Boeing when Airbus was violating international rules with subsidies. He discovered Boeing during the course of this campaign after I've been talking about it for months. The fact is that the president had an opportunity to stand up and take on China for currency manipulation. There are companies that wanted to petition the administration. They were told, don't even bother. We're not going to listen to it. The fact is that there have been markets shut to us that we haven't stood up and fought for. I'm going to fight for a fair trade playing field for the American worker. And I will fight for the American worker just as hard as I fight for my own job. That's what the American worker wants. And if we do that, we can have an impact. Plus, we need fiscal discipline. Restore fiscal discipline, we'll do a lot better.
Mr. Preston.
Whew. Let me start with the Pell Grants. In his last litany of misstatements, he said, we cut Pell Grants. We've increased Pell Grants by 1 million students. That's a fact. You know, he talks to the workers. Let me talk to the workers. You got more money in your pocket as a result of the tax relief we passed and he opposed. If you have a child, you got a $1,000 child credit. That's money in your pocket. If you're married, we reduced the marriage penalty. The code ought to encourage marriage, not discourage marriage. We created a 10% bracket to help lower-income Americans. A family of 4 making $40,000 received about $1,700 in tax relief. It's your money. The way my opponent talks, he said we're going to spend the government's money. No, we're spending your money. And when you have more money in your pocket, you're able to better afford things you want. I believe the role of government is to stand side by side with our citizens to help them realize their dreams, not tell citizens how to live their lives. My opponent talks about fiscal sanity. His record in the United States Senate does not match his rhetoric. He voted to increase taxes 98 times and to bust the budget 277 times.
Senator Kerry?
Bob, anybody can play with these votes. Everybody knows that. I have supported or voted for tax cuts over 600 times. I broke with my party in order to balance the budget, and Ronald Reagan signed into law the tax cut that we voted for. I voted for IRA tax cuts. I voted for small business tax cuts. But you know why the Pell Grants have gone up in their numbers? Because more people qualify for them because they don't have money. But they're not getting the $5,100 the president promised them. They're getting less money. There are more people who qualify. That's not what we want.
Senator, no one's playing on your votes. You voted to increase taxes 98 times. When they proposed reducing taxes, you voted against 126 times. You voted to violate the budget caps 277 times. You know, there's a mainstream in American politics, and you sit right on the far left bank. As a matter of fact, your record is such that Ted Kennedy, your colleague, is the conservative senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, let's get back to economic issues, but let's shift to some other questions here. Both of you are opposed to gay marriage, but to understand how you have come to that conclusion, I want to ask you a more basic question. Do you believe homosexuality is a choice?
You know, Bob, I don't know. I just don't know. I do know that we have a choice to make in America, and that is to treat people with tolerance and respect and dignity. It's important that we do that. I also know in a free society, consenting adults can live the way they want to live, and that's to be honored. But as we respect someone's rights, and as we profess tolerance, we shouldn't change, or have to change, our basic views on the sanctity of marriage. I believe in the sanctity of marriage. I think it's very important that we protect marriage as an institution between a man and a woman. I proposed a constitutional amendment. The reason I did so was because I was worried that activist judges are actually defining the definition of marriage. And the surest way to protect marriage between a man and woman is to amend the Constitution. It has also the benefit of allowing citizens to participate in the process. After all, when you amend the Constitution, state legislatures must participate in the ratification of the Constitution. I'm deeply concerned that judges are making those decisions and not the citizenry of the United States. You know, Congress passed a law called DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. My opponent was against it. It basically protected states from the action of one state to another. It also defined marriage as between a man and a woman. But I'm concerned that will get overturned, and if it gets overturned, then we'll end up with marriage being defined by courts. And I don't think that's in our nation's interest.
Senator Kerry?
We're all God's children, Bob, and I think if you were to talk to Dick Cheney's daughter, who is a lesbian, she would tell you that she's being who she was. She's being who she was born as. I think if you talk to anybody, it's not choice. I've met people who struggled with this for years, people who were in a marriage because they were living a sort of convention, and they struggled with it. And I've met wives who are supportive of their husbands or vice versa when they finally sort of broke out and allowed themselves to live who they were, who they felt God had made them. I think we have to respect that. The President and I share the belief that marriage is between a man and a woman. I believe that. I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. But I also believe that because we are the United States of America, we're a country with a great, unbelievable constitution with rights that we afford people, that you can't discriminate in the workplace. You can't discriminate in the rights that you afford people. You can't disallow someone the right to visit their partner in a hospital. You have to allow people to transfer property, which is why I'm for partnership rights and so forth. Now, with respect to DOMA and the marriage laws, the states have always been able to manage those laws, and they're proving today, every state, that they can manage them adequately.
Senator Kerry, a new question for you. The New York Times reports that some Catholic archbishops are telling their church members that it would be a sin to vote for a candidate like you because you support a woman's right to choose an abortion and unlimited stem cell research. What is your reaction to that?
I respect their views. I completely respect their views. I am a Catholic, and I grew up learning how to respect those views, but I disagree with them, as do many. I believe that I can't legislate or transfer to another American citizen my article of faith. What is an article of faith for me is not something that I can legislate on somebody who doesn't share that article of faith. I believe that choice is a woman's choice, between a woman, God, and her doctor. And that's why I support that. Now, I will not allow somebody to come in and change Roe v. Wade. The president has never said whether or not he would do that. But we know from the people he's tried to point to the court he wants to. I will not. I will defend the right of Roe v. Wade. Now, with respect to religion, you know, as I said, I grew up a Catholic. I was an altar boy. I know that throughout my life, this has made a difference to me. And as President Kennedy said when he ran for president, he said, I'm not running to be a Catholic president. I'm running to be a president who happens to be Catholic. Now, my faith affects everything that I do and choose. There's a great passage of the Bible that says, what does it mean, my brother, to say you have faith if there are no deeds? Faith without works is dead. And I think that everything you do in public life has to be guided by your faith, affected by your faith, but without transferring it in any official way to other people. For that's why I fight against poverty. That's why I fight to clean up the environment, protect this earth. That's why I fight for equality and justice. All of those things come out of that fundamental teaching and belief of faith. But I know this, that President Kennedy in his inaugural address told all of us that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. And that's what we have to say. I think that's the test of public service.
Mr. President?
I think it's important to promote a culture of life. I think a hospitable society is a society where every being counts and every person matters. I believe the ideal world is one in which every child is protected in law and welcome to life. I understand there's great differences on this issue of abortion, but I believe reasonable people can come together and put good law in place that will help reduce the number of abortions. Take, for example, the ban on partial birth abortion. It's a brutal practice. People from both political parties came together in the halls of Congress and voted overwhelmingly to ban that practice. Made a lot of sense. My opponent, in that he's out of the mainstream, voted against that law. What I'm saying is that as we promote life and promote a culture of life, surely there are ways we can work together to reduce the number of abortions, continue to promote adoption laws. It's a great alternative to abortion. Continue to fund and promote maternity group homes. I will continue to promote abstinence programs. The last debate, my opponent said his wife was involved with those programs. That's great, and I appreciate that very much. All of us ought to be involved with programs that provide a viable alternative to abortion.
Good evening. A guilty verdict in the Florida trial of a billionaire Colombian drug dealer. Carlos Later was accused of smuggling cocaine by the ton into the U.S. Bruce Hall was in the courtroom for the case of the drug cartel kingpin finally forced to face justice.
After struggling for a week to reach a verdict, several members of the jury were in tears as they returned their decision in the trial of Colombian drug lord Carlos Later. Their verdict made a strong statement. On count 1, conspiracy to bring drugs into the United States, guilty. On 9 specific drug charges, guilty. On the main charge, conducting continuing criminal activities, which carries a mandatory 10-year to life sentence, guilty.
This is a victory for the good guys, and by the good guys, I mean the American people. This is truly a major victory in the war on drugs.
Mr. Later fully intends to appeal this verdict, and we're fully convinced that when the dust settles after this trial is over, that he'll be awarded a new trial. This trial was not a fair trial.
Carlos Later believed that he could act with impunity, that he could find safe haven, and in fact, he didn't find safe haven. The extradition process worked.
In the 1970s, Carlos Later developed one of the largest drug transportation systems in South America, pioneering the use of airplanes to smuggle more than 18 tons of cocaine into the United States.
But he called it his duty to his country to haul cocaine. Half the people in Colombia made a living directly or indirectly from cocaine.
The Later verdict now may be used to expand the fight against international drug trafficking.
I think now you have a government that is more willing to go after some of the international drug dealers heretofore, who we seem to kind of look the other way.
And the next target may be the Bahamas Prime Minister Lyndon Pinling. There was testimony in this trial that Pinling received at least $5 million to let drug traffickers use some of the Bahamian islands. Federal prosecutors say they will recommend that Carlos Later be given a sentence that will ensure he is never eligible for parole. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Jacksonville.
Another accused big-time foreign drug trafficker is waiting to go on trial in this country, and some influential people back home in Honduras are not happy about it. Richard Schlesinger reports tonight on the hard realities of narco-politics and how it's impeding the war on drugs.
In a country as poor as Honduras, it is easy to be a Robin Hood. These tobacco workers are employed by Ramon Mata, a man they consider a hero, a man U.S. and Honduran authorities consider one of the biggest cocaine dealers in the world, and one of those responsible for the murder of an American drug enforcement agent.
The major drug traffickers do take some resources in order to generate support in communities.
Before he was captured and brought to the United States last month, Mata, who was reportedly worth billions, spread his money around, becoming known as a rich man who cared about the poor. When this neighborhood in rural Honduras needed a school, the only person rich enough to build it was Ramon Mata. Now, every child here sits in a class with the name of a suspected drug lord painted on each desk. Mata also created jobs in this town as the owner of a cigar factory. Amparo Gallo, who rolls cigars at Mata's factory, says, "I felt like he was one of my children." Even the factory's union leader says Mata gives toys to children and gifts on Mother's Day. But while he was carefully cultivating his Robin Hood image, the Hondurans believe Mata spent millions buying up legitimate businesses, increasing his influence over this country's frail economy. Sources here say Mata had become so powerful he already controlled several national legislators and was in a position to influence the upcoming elections. Officials here were worried that if Mata was not arrested and soon, he would never be brought to trial. The country's military leader even came to consider Mata a threat to national security.
With the social platform he was developing, plus his money, I think he could soon even get to be president of Honduras.
Mata's popularity was so great that when he was arrested, there were violent demonstrations and the U.S. Embassy was attacked. In Washington, Mata's capture is considered a victory in the war on drugs. But in rural Honduras, Mata is still winning another war for the hearts and minds of the people. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, Danlí, Honduras.
In Washington, bold move in court today by prosecutors in the criminal case of Oliver North, John Poindexter and Company. A move to use some of the testimony North and others gave to Congress at their trial. Rita Braver reports on what's going on here.
When Oliver North testified before Congress on the Iran-Contra affair, he tried to take the Fifth Amendment.
I respectfully decline to answer the question based on my constitutional Fifth Amendment rights.
But Congress granted him immunity and ordered him to talk.
May not refuse to provide any evidence to these committees on the basis of your privilege against self-incrimination.
Traditionally, that means anything a witness says under oath cannot be used against him in a legal case. But today, in a surprising maneuver, independent counsel Lawrence Walsh told a federal court that he wants to use major portions of North's testimony against North during his trial. 198 statements. For example, North's admission that he altered National Security Council documents at the request of former National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane.
I had created them, and I was now changing them, in consonance with what I believed he wanted on the documents to begin with.
And the independent counsel wants to use former National Security Advisor John Poindexter's testimony that he destroyed the first presidential finding authorizing the sale of arms to Iran.
Because I thought it was a significant political embarrassment to the president, and I wanted to protect him from possible disclosure of this.
Walsh also wants to use statements made by money man Albert Hakim when he testified under an immunity grant. Walsh is taking the position that the only protected answers are those directly responding to a specific question. Asides or elaborations are not immune. One expert says that view would intimidate all future immunized witnesses.
They may be afraid to testify freely and openly, and in the most expansive way that they can.
Walsh does point out that his case can go forward without use of the testimony, which suggests that it all may be a game of lawyers' poker, Dan.
Well, Rita, what about Walsh's statement that he's never seen any of the congressional testimony?
Well, in fact, Walsh still has not seen or heard the testimony. This filing was made in his name by a special lawyer he hired just to handle the immunity issue. What's going on here may be a clever attempt to counter the defendant's claims that the case should be dismissed because in subtle ways it does rely on immunized testimony, Dan.
Thanks, Rita Braver.
On a humid August night in 1987, two high school seniors, Don Henry and Kevin Ives, while hiking in the woods of their nearby southern community, paid a terrible price for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The facts in the case indicate that the two boys happened upon a transaction of some kind, involving a ring of longtime smugglers and billion-dollar drug profiteers. But the story doesn't end with the tragic deaths of these two young men, or the years of pain and suffering caused their families. Now the story takes a turn toward the dark corners of government, where lies are routinely sanctioned by powerful men.
You know, very early on we knew that there was local corruption in law enforcement. And
my parents received word that from a couple of law enforcement agencies that there was a hit contract out on my head.
While my head was turned, I heard what sounded like a gunshot.
If they can stick some garbage like this on me, then every American better be scared to death.
You're risking everything that you do in this line of work. That's why the pay is so good.
It's time for the American people to wake up and realize that unless they make government behave, that a very big criminal is going to join the ranks of the criminal, and that's called government.
If you think that the largest, most profitable business in the United States is the automobile industry or any other American megacorporation, you're wrong. The illegal drug business generates revenues of over $140 billion per annum, more than any of the largest multinational corporations. In the mid-1980s, cocaine and her evil sister crack flood the United States, the vicious tentacles of the drug trade penetrating deep into the heart of the country's inner cities. Though government lip service is given and appointments made, the drug czars and border patrols thrown at the problem cannot curtail the efforts of the country's largest and most enterprising of smugglers, the government itself. Why would members of the highest levels of government stoop to such base pursuits? The small town of Mena, Arkansas may hold the key.
In August 1987, my son Kevin had spent the night with his friend Don Henry. And Don's dad had allowed them to go out hunting. The next thing we knew, we'd been told that they'd been run over by a train.
7th Judicial District Prosecutor Dan Harmon heads the initial grand jury.
The chief deputy at that time ordered the scene worked as an accident against all apparent police policy. They used the rear end of the train as a reference point in locating different evidence and things along the tracks. And of course, when the train left the scene, they had absolutely nothing.
We were told to work as an accident, or the investigators were told to work as an accident, and it was not enough time and emphasis put into it right there at the scene.
They literally fanned out about 4 deputies across and walked the point of impact to where the bodies were, and whatever they found they simply dumped in black garbage bags. Their investigation was so thorough that they left my son's foot out there for 2 days in plain sight.
Arkansas's controversial chief medical examiner, Fahmy Malak, takes over the case. His friend, Jocelyn Elders, heads up the Arkansas Health Department. Both Malak and Elders are close friends and supporters of then-Governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton.
Well, the explanation that the medical examiner had 3 weeks after the deaths was that they had smoked massive amounts of marijuana, had simply fallen asleep on the tracks and didn't hear the train coming. One of the things that we knew at that time, and they were lying in identical positions across the tracks, and certainly didn't add up to the fact that they were stoned out of their minds. Everybody knew Kevin. He had a very good reputation as a good kid, was not known as some dope head, and certainly I think the fact that his father was a locomotive engineer was very troubling to many as to why he would lay down and rest on the railroad tracks. If he'd ever been cautioned about anything, it's the danger of trains.
As the investigation progresses, the Ives family receives more disturbing news.
We also had begun hearing rumors of a tarp covering the boys. We questioned the authorities about it and were told that it was simply an optical illusion. Later on, we learned that not only did the train crew see the tarp, they even took one deputy back to the point of impact, located the tarp, shined his light on it, and said, "There's the tarp that was covering the boys before impact of the train."
Attention, I knew it was some kind of a tarp. You know, it wasn't a bad body bag. Because they had it, you know, more or less folded. And close as I can remember, they laid it down right there.
That tarp disappeared and has not been seen since.
Bombarded by conflicting evidence and lies, the families do their best to cope with their grief. Meanwhile, Dan Harmon slows and blocks the investigation in whatever manner possible.
Been decided that there will be a gag order imposed on all 16 members of the grand jury, although one should not be necessary. Whatever comes out of it, if someone's charged or not charged, the grand jury has done a tremendous job.
We got absolutely no cooperation whatsoever from local or state officials. We were very frustrated and angry, and we had been told to obtain court orders, which we did. The Little Rock Crime Lab defied a court order to supply the things that we were requesting in order to get a second opinion. Saline Memorial Hospital also defied a court order. And everywhere we went, we ran into a brick wall.
Dr. Mallett, you know me.
I have work to do.
Dr. Mallett.
This local news program breaks a story impugning the competence of the coroner, Fahmy Malak. Malak's friend and longtime associate, Jocelyn Elders, stands firmly behind him, blaming the press for irresponsible reporting.
I really feel that Arkansas owes Dr. Malak a great debt and a real apology.
Reports have also indicated that Malak lied in various trials when asked about his credentials.
And my record speaks for itself.
In an exclusive interview, Dr. Fahmy Malak defended his record.
I never lied under oath. Never. Never. Never.
But not all of Malak's former co-workers hold the same confidence. Philip Kaplan represents Malak's former assistant, Dr. Lee Beamer. Beamer is suing Malak for allegedly firing him without proper cause. Beamer previously revealed that Malak testified about autopsies he never conducted.
Dr. Malak admitted that although he testified under oath in a court proceeding involving a murder trial, that he had actually himself conducted an autopsy, that he was in the state of Mississippi having some car trouble while that autopsy was being performed.
Although Malak is no longer under a gag order by the Saline County Grand Jury, he has decided not to comment on any allegations against him.
Dr. Malak, people say that as state medical examiner you bungled cases and lied.
Sir, I told you before, like our president said, read my lips. I'm not going to comment.
According to an extensive review of court documents and trial testimony, Malak has been overturned in at least 3 medical cases. In total frustration, the families hired Dr. Joseph Burton, a nationally respected forensic pathologist, to perform a new autopsy on Don Henry and Kevin Ives.
The deaths of these 2 boys, most probably were not accidental deaths, but that they met their death as a result of injuries inflicted on them by other people or another person.
Don Henry had been stabbed, and Kevin was crushed in the face with the butt of a rifle, most likely.
Dr. Malak conducted autopsies on the 2 boys at the state morgue. But to the astonishment of experts who later conducted a second autopsy, Dr. Malak somehow failed to notice clear evidence of beating marks and a stab wound. But Dr. Malak never admitted making a mistake.
Was there a stab? The answer is no, they were not stabbed. Were they dead beforehand? Absolutely no, they were alive.
In addition to the controversy surrounding the deaths, dark rumors about illegal drugs circulate throughout the small community.
We began hearing things about drugs, drop sites and drops from trains. And
after nearly 2 years of botched investigations, blatant lies, false autopsies, and cover-ups, Linda Ives remains committed to uncovering the identity of the killers. She can't help but wonder who is going to all of this trouble to cover up the truth. Would a small town like Mina have so much meaning to drug lords and smugglers that they would risk mutilating and murdering 2 innocent young boys?
With all of the potential places for obscure drug drops in other states, perhaps even in states that are in a closer proximity to U.S. borders, why did Little Mina become so significant to the drug trade?
Russell Welch, an Arkansas State Police officer, begins working on the Criminal Investigation Unit in the early 80s. His first major assignment is to monitor suspicious flight activity at Mina Airport.
There are shops at the airport that do good work on aircraft, and it is small. There's not a tower on it, so it's not monitored, so it's an ideal spot for a smuggler to be able to find at nighttime without having to worry about being recorded every time they come in and leave. It seems to be a nice centrally located field without a lot of monitoring, without a lot of law enforcement to bother them.
During the 80s, the most notorious drug smuggler in America was Barry Seal. Seal began his career as TWA's youngest pilot. His resourcefulness and talent soon earned him a place with the U.S. Army's Special Forces. Ultimately, Seal is recruited by the CIA for anti-Castro and anti-communist smuggling jobs in Central and South America. Seal's ties with the CIA protect him from the DEA, the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies. Gradually, he amasses a fleet of airplanes with a network of pilots and mechanics. He develops strong ties with the Medellin cartel, working on both sides of the law. In setting up drug stings and covert operations for government agencies, it is often said that Barry brings back a kilo for the feds and another for himself.
The local sheriff was passing information on about a cocaine smuggler from Baton Rouge by the name of Barry, whose planes were being stored out there. Gave a complete rundown. They were able to photograph activity at Rich Mountain Aviation, tail numbers being changed, planes being handled in a suspicious manner, characteristic of what you'd expect from consistent with the smuggling operation. I knew that Barry Seal was working as an informant. I knew that he had been busted and convicted in Florida and had rolled over, had become a snitch to stay out of prison. And I assumed that while he was working with federal agents in Florida, that they were protecting him from my investigation in Arkansas.
On April 15, 1985, President Reagan makes a speech relating his dismay over the situation in Nicaragua.
The history of this century forces me to believe that to do nothing in Central America is to give the first communist stronghold on the North American continent a green light to spread its poison throughout this free and increasingly democratic world.
1985 is also a significant year for Barry Seal's career.
1985, a DEA agent in Arkansas told me that he had been contacted by a friend of his in Mobile, Alabama, who said that Barry Seal was smuggling guns to Nicaragua and being allowed as a reward to fly back into country with a load of cocaine.
Among Seal's highly efficient, tight-knit group of pilots is his closest friend and brother-in-law, Billy Bob Bottoms, an ex-Vietnam helicopter jockey. Keeping things all in the family, Billy Bob is entrusted as one of Barry's major cocaine pilots.
We had a light twin-engine airplane that was highly sophisticated with its electronics and the range capability. We could fly nonstop from the United States to Colombia. I would make the flight. I would take off usually in the middle of the night, fly to Colombia, land in Colombia, refuel, and I would pick up approximately six duffel bags of cocaine, which was around 300 kilos. I would fly back nonstop from Colombia to the United States, and I would make an airdrop.
Seal's operation maximizes efficiency and secrecy. The drops are mechanically executed on a carefully contrived schedule, always conducted under a shroud of darkness.
We had a door modification that we could pull the door inside the airplane and move it out of the way. We had a roller track built on the floor. We built a pallet, an aluminum pallet, that we could put all 6 duffel bags in that aluminum pallet and fold sides up around the duffel bags and clipped the top together. We had these harnesses that were hooked to each duffel bag and to a parachute. When the drop point approached, we would push it out the door with a static line hooked to the airplane, would deploy the chute. Our altitude was usually around slightly less than 1,000 feet, to where when the chute opened, the merchandise hit the ground. The pallet system was designed such that when the merchandise hit the ground, it burst open, absorbing all the shock, and the duffel bags just lay on the ground. There was never any tumbling or damage to the merchandise.
You didn't need anybody's protection to fly an airplane into the United States and evade the radar. You didn't need protection for that. We did it routinely without any fear.
His efficiency and the freedom to operate out of a remote, virtually ignored location makes it easy for SEAL to generate a tremendous revenue stream. He spreads his cheer liberally with many local officials and MENA business owners, exchanging money for protection or their agreement to look the other way. None are interested in rocking the boat.
It is conservatively estimated that at the height of Barry SEAL's operation in the mid-'80s, planes were flying into MENA and other locations in the U.S. at the rate of 4 to 5 times a week. The cargo ranged from 300 kilos to 1,500 kilos a flight. And the street value of this deadly daily load would easily be worth $15 to $75 million. Marijuana, cocaine, and heroin were all freely smuggled in.
The stalled and mishandled investigations into Kevin's and Don's death reach a dead end. Even the nationwide coverage of network television series like Unsolved Mysteries and interest from 60 Minutes can't crack the shell of cover-up encircling the case. Rumors abound, but solutions are not at hand. Nearly 2.5 years after the train deaths, a federally mandated drug task force is established throughout Arkansas. A feisty prosecutor, Gene Duffy, is assigned to run the 7th Task Force.
I established a drug task force, set it up, hired undercover officers, learned what I could to help the district get on its feet with investigation of drug activities in the district.
Instantly, one of her investigators reveals that the now infamous train deaths may be tied to a major drug smuggling ring operating out of MENA.
There were people who had been turning up dead who were possible witnesses in the train deaths case. I respected my undercover officer's instincts about the case, and I certainly gave him permission to go forward with an investigation. He said that there were drug drops coming from airplanes in that area, in the exact vicinity where Kevin and Don had been murdered. And these drug drops from airplanes had virtually not been investigated by any of the law enforcement agencies in our district.
Further investigation reveals numerous complaints by residents, informing police of low-altitude flybys occurring late at night.
Saline County Sheriff officer would go out, take the statement from the witness, and then file the report. And there was actually no investigation. Now, these reports were there when Kevin and Don were murdered.
If the police are taking payoffs, Duffy knows that her team must gather evidence from the streets first.
I hired 7 undercover officers whose job it was to initially make street buys, work their way up the ladder into the suppliers eventually, and of course that's who we were after. And the connections that we made almost immediately led to several public officials. And the person whose name came up immediately and most frequently was Dan Harmon. We also developed an informant who was a confessed drug smuggler who told us that she had actually picked up a package of cocaine from that vicinity. She also had testified before the federal grand jury that she and Dan Harmon were lovers, but he was married at the time.
When Harmon, now newly elected county prosecutor, becomes aware of her investigation, the local press starts receiving false leaks discrediting Duffy and her task force.
The people who were immediately launched a campaign to discredit me and disband my task force was led by Dan Harmon. And of course it became apparent almost immediately that Dan Harmon was a key player in the drug smuggling, drug trafficking activity.
As county prosecutor, it is easy for Dan Harmon to file trumped-up charges against Gene Duffy.
My drug task force was shut down cold because we were getting too close. We were shut down actually before we could even get into our investigation, to the point where we had something significant to take to the grand jury in the way of asking for indictments.
Harmon succeeds in getting Duffy fired, after which he pursues her with a vengeance.
I didn't understand why 2 felony warrants were issued for my arrest when the warrants were illegal, because there was no felony charge. I knew there had to be some very powerful players behind what was happening.
In an unexpected twist, Harmon himself falls into trouble with the law.
Harmon was released from federal custody yesterday while he awaits his trial. You may remember just last Thursday, Harmon was jailed after refusing to take drug tests. Harmon maintains his innocence and says he's a victim of government harassment.
If they can stick some garbage like this on me, then every American better be scared to death.
Why should every American be scared to death? Was Harmon involved in a much larger illegal operation? Additional details of the Barry Seal story may help provide insights into the substance and magnitude of Harmon's statements. Although he has been in and out of jail and is constantly fighting the law, by 1985, Barry Seal is making so much money working with Pablo Escobar, Carlos Lader, and the Medellin cartel that his daily deposits into his bank are often more than $50,000. Some officials estimate that Seal's public and hidden assets are worth well over $5 billion. His most important asset, however, seems to rest in his uncanny ability to work within the margins of law enforcement. Louis Unglesby, then a young Baton Rouge attorney, represents Seal in his various entanglements with the law.
The documented evidence is that while Barry may have done some bad things, which I don't know that he ever did, but he certainly was being chased for them and convicted of at least 2 different events. When he got out of jail, he did a lot of things that the government couldn't do. And he brought into justice a lot of extremely bad people, very dangerous people, and very, very, very serious worldwide criminals.
Meanwhile, the Reagan administration is having difficulty convincing the American people and Congress to fund the Contra Army and their counterinsurgencies against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua.
The Soviets and Sandinistas must not be permitted to crush freedom in Central America and threaten our own security on our own doorstep. Now the Congress must decide where it stands. So tonight, I ask you to do what you've done so often in the past. Get in touch with your representative and senators and urge them to vote yes. Tell them to help the freedom fighters. Help us prevent a communist takeover of Central America.
Reagan's anti-communist fervor proves useful to Barry Seal, because later that year, Barry's luck runs out. After several brushes with the law, he is busted for trying to fence $200,000 worth of Quaaludes in Fort Lauderdale. Released on bail and facing a 10-year federal sentence, Seal flies to Washington, D.C. and boasts to officials at the Drug Enforcement Agency that he can implicate the Nicaraguan Sandinistas in a cocaine smuggling operation. This meets with strong interest from representatives of the G.W.Bush Drug Task Force and Reagan's point men in covert operations at the National Security Agency, Admiral Poindexter and his top aide, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Just weeks away from certain conviction, Seal finds himself a free man and back in the drug and arms delivery business. He convinces the CIA and DEA to fund over $40,000 worth of upgrades to his favorite freight aircraft, his C-123.
Once Oliver North and the CIA found out about the drug sting that the DEA was working on was in Nicaragua, he interjected himself into that drug sting.
With DEA and National Security Agency assistance, Seal enlists the help of his Medellin cartel connections in Panama and Federico Vaughn, a CIA operative in Nicaragua. Together they stage a drug delivery at a small crop duster field in Nicaragua. The photos that SEAL takes have tremendous significance when Oliver North delivers them to President Reagan.
The Sandinistas have even involved themselves in the international drug trade. I know every American parent concerned about the drug problem will be outraged to learn that top Nicaraguan government officials are deeply involved in drug trafficking. This picture, secretly taken at a military airfield outside Managua, shows Federico Vaughn, a top aide to one of the 9 commandantes who rule Nicaragua, loading an aircraft with illegal narcotics bound for the United States. No, there seems to be no crime to which the Sandinistas will not stoop. This is an outlaw regime.
CIA operatives in Central America report back that Reagan's speech has effectively blown the cover on the Medellin cartel, which until that time had been moving their drugs primarily through the corrupt Panamanian government and the Contra leadership. The cartel quickly shifts its smuggling routes.
What Oliver North was trying to do was support the Contras. That's all he cared about. He didn't care about the Medellin cartel and what they could do or what they went on to do as a result of him blowing the cover on that operation. Had he not blown the cover on that operation, 3/4 of the Medellin cartel would have been arrested.
Within weeks, the cartel's operation is back in full swing. With the large inflow of drug profits that follows, the Reagan administration's Freedom Fighter Fund coffers are full enough to finance the development of Nella, Arkansas, a small airport and base camp a few miles from Mina. Here, the CIA trains and equips Contra insurgents.
The runway's right there. That's the runway. And that hill, there's electricity up there. In fact, you see a little shack there now. And we were going to build a camp there.
The gears of SEAL's operation turn flawlessly. But in the illegal drug trade, nothing blows harder than the winds of change.
The story is there's a $350,000 contract on your life.
That's true. John, there's a risk in all covert operation work. There's a risk in everything that you do in this line of work. That's why the pay is so good.
In early 1986, the Reagan administration found itself embroiled in controversy. A Beirut newspaper broke a story about a secret arms deal between the United States and Iran. Profits from the sale of American tow missiles to Iran were being hidden in a Swiss bank account. These funds were used by Reagan's Red Guard, Admiral Poindexter and Oliver North, to fund the Contra operation in Nicaragua against the will of the Congress, the American people, and most importantly, against the letter of the Constitution.
With the controversial news leaks over Iran-Contra funds, public pressure on the administration increases and ultimately forces a reply.
What is involved is that in the course of the arms transfers, certain monies were taken and made available to the forces in Central America which are opposing the Sandinista government there.
Senator John Tower assembles a commission to study the covert operation. Rumors circulate that all involved will be subpoenaed to public hearing. One of the principals, however, will not be subpoenaed. Barry Seal is assassinated in February 1986 by hitmen allegedly sent by the Medellin cartel. At the time of his assassination, the FBI, DEA, and state and local New Orleans police were each tailing Barry, investigating one of several drug indictments. A local prosecutor, Sam Dalton, discovers how important Seal is to the FBI when they seize a trunk from Barry's car on the night of the assassination. The trunk allegedly has information linking Seal to the National Security Agency, CIA Director William Casey, and other high officials in Washington.
If it hadn't been for a good state judge with enough courage to back the federal government up, we'd have never gotten inside that trunk. He made them give us that trunk back. Obviously, they had ransacked that trunk and some of the things we didn't get back, but they had missed a few things that indicated just how valuable that trunk was.
3 months later, another international embarrassment plagues the Reagan administration. On October 3, 1986, Barry Seal's infamous Fat Lady, now in use by the CIA, is shot down by Sandinista gunners over southern Nicaragua. The plane is loaded to the gills with weapons and supplies for the Contras. 3 American crewmen are killed, and a 4th, Eugene Hassenfuss, is captured.
My name is Gene Hassenfuss. Marinette, Wisconsin. The people involved were not from our military, not from any U.S. government agency, and CIA included.
CIA activities involving Eugene Hassenfuss date back to the agency's 60s drug smuggling operations in Laos under the infamous Air America Corporation. Following his arrest, Sandinista officials find concealed in his uniform the phone numbers for CIA operatives in Nicaragua, for the National Security Agency, and a direct line to the offices of then Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush. The Sandinista government sentences Hassenfuss to 30 years for arms smuggling. Within a month, he is mysteriously pardoned and released. In 1987, as Congress investigates the covert Contra operation, drugs and Contra resupply operate freely out of Mina. Despite constant monitoring by federal and local agents, payoffs and kickbacks effectively prevent any arrests.
Every afternoon when I was working out, I've seen Oliver North answer questions. It was his turn, and he was answering questions to the subcommittee. And I thought, well, these guys are telling me something illegal is going on here because Congress is investigating it as illegal activity. But had been overloaded on the Barry Seal thing. It just wore me into ground. I was way out of my league, and I wasn't getting any help from anybody.
Admiral Poindexter and Lieutenant Colonel North are sent packing as the Iran-Contra hearings draw to a close. Only a few weeks before Kevin and Don are murdered, Russell Welch observes some interesting developments.
In August of 1987, 2 FBI agents came here to Mina, asked to meet with me, agents that I'd known and worked with for years, and told me that they had just received word that Southern Air Transport had moved its operation from Miami to Mina. But out of nowhere, a C-130 appeared at the Mina airport. It was the same month that the boys were killed that the agents came to me.
Southern Air Transport, a CIA front since the 60s, continues the nighttime drop into Mina even after the deaths of Kevin and Don.
With no support from state, federal, or even local authorities, Linda Ives and Gene Duffy continue their search for missing clues related to the murders, even though it's obvious to them that the marching orders for the drug activity come from on high, from people who have never even heard of the train deaths or the names of the 2 young men, Kevin Ives and Don Henry. No one wants to jeopardize that heavenly flow of money, even if it is drug money.
The first investigation, of course, was the Saline County Sheriff's investigation led by James Steed. It was very apparent that he was covering up information, suppressing information, and certainly was part of the cover-up initially. When Dan Harmon was appointed special prosecutor, he led a county grand jury investigation, which was nothing more than a several months of orchestrated cover-ups where several witnesses turned up dead.
And when the state police got involved, we were ecstatic because we thought that finally somebody was going to get to the bottom of what was going on in Saline County.
Another investigation that was nothing more than a sham was the Arkansas State Police investigation. They now have a file that is almost 3 feet high. Only about an inch of that file reflects interviews that were actually conducted, and it is nothing more than a sham.
And then there was a 1990 federal investigation, and we were in fact promised indictments out of that 1990 federal grand jury investigation. And suddenly when Chuck Banks shut that investigation down in June of '91, without prior warning, we were devastated, because who has the power to shut down a federal investigation?
I didn't understand then why the U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks shut down the federal investigation and cleared Dan Harmon. And this was in spite of that grand jury unanimously wanting to indict Dan Harmon.
6 years after the incident, an eyewitness to the murders reveals himself to Linda Ives.
Linda Ives turned this witness over to a local investigator who took him to the FBI. The FBI immediately put this witness into protective custody, gave him a polygraph test, which he passed, and opened their investigation.
Where we didn't realize there was anybody else out there at first. We were, just like I said, goofing off. We come up on, or didn't really come up on, we noticed there were people on the track, saw a flashlight come on and then go back off. They weren't looking in our direction, but we could see the light. And so we kind of quieted down and snuck up a little bit closer to see what was going on, and there was 5 individuals standing on the tracks. One thing that struck my curiosity is, at the time my mother was dating an attorney named Dan Harmon. I knew him well enough to recognize him. There were 2 more individuals that a few minutes after we got there were walking down the railroad tracks that had a rifle and what looked to be a flashlight. And they were more or less kind of minding their own business. And when they realized someone else was on the tracks, they stopped and was fixing to turn around when someone, or Danny, motioned for them to come closer over to where they were. They hesitated and eventually ended up walking on towards the rest of the group. While my head was turned, I heard what sounded like a gunshot. I saw a flash, as you would expect with a gunshot at night. We were pretty much terrified and bolted and ran.
Other witnesses corroborated that evidence.
I know that Dan Harmon went down there because I was down the road from there. It's in an automobile. I do know that a drop was made. I've absolutely 100% unequivocally made there that night.
The only positive note in the ongoing investigation is that the law finally catches up with Dan Harmon.
Court definitely wasn't in session in this Benton courtroom this morning, but instead a farewell party for Saline County Prosecutor Dan Harmon, who says he's headed to Gulfport, Mississippi to live.
It's time to move on to another chapter and do something different. Enjoyed about all this I can stand.
Shortly after Harmon's resignation, he is indicted and convicted on a number of tax evasion, drug, and racketeering counts.
After 2 days of deliberations, the jury found Harmon guilty of 5 of 11 counts, guilty of drug charges, racketeering, and extortion.
In November of 1995, Linda and Larry Ives insisted on having a meeting with the FBI in charge of the Little Rock office, who told Linda and Larry that after an exhaustive FBI investigation of 18 months, they had no evidence of anything, and they should consider that a crime had not been committed.
Every stalled or dropped investigation prolongs the misery felt by the families of these 2 lost boys. Because there is no closure, there can be no peace. Working independently, Linda and Jean occasionally turn up new evidence about the train deaths. Louis Unglesby, former attorney for Barry Seal, makes a startling revelation about his former client. When Barry died, he was being pursued by the IRS for unpaid taxes estimated at over $80 million.
I was going to court and arguing all the time for different issues involving Barry because I felt like they really were guilty of a lot of misconduct in the manner in which they were investigating him, not knowing about his involvement in the government. In the course of that, it was a lot of work for me, it was a lot of work for the prosecutors here, and one of them said to me, why don't you just tell Barry to call in the cavalry and we won't have to worry about this anymore. I didn't know what he was talking about, so I asked Barry. And as a result, and asking him, he said, okay, I won't tell you much, but let me show you, just call this phone number. So he gives me this phone number, I call the phone number. That's when we talked to Vice President Bush's office. So then they put this admiral on the phone, or they put somebody who said he was an admiral on the phone. And then I told him who I really was, and he was nonplussed by that and hung up. And then I said, now Barry, really, I'm confused. So Barry called back, and they, they just exchanged a little greeting, and Barry apologized to him for having me call.
Well, the only thing I can conclude is because they were talking to each other very seriously over probably what was a secured phone number, a secured phone, and Barry Seals was in direct contact with Bush. That's why I say he had Bush pretty well conned.
In its desperation to finance a clandestine underground war, the Reagan administration was already dealing with terrorists in Iran. Why not drug lords in Colombia? Barry Seal was clearly connected to men occupying the highest offices in the land. With prosecutor Dan Harmon, allegedly Seal's local operative, indicted, the guilty finger was taking a turn toward government.
It's time for the American people to wake up and realize that unless they make government and do right, they're going to lose their freedoms, and on the premise that government can solve the crime problem if they give up their freedom. And the American people's got to realize that they're going to wind up with both. They're going to wind up with the loss of their freedoms, and they're still going to have the crime problem. The only difference is going to be that a very big criminal is going to join the ranks of the criminal, and that's called government.
The murderers of Kevin and Don may never be brought to justice. If their deaths are related to government impropriety, then there the stain of shame shall remain. The drugs flowing out of Mena, Arkansas have destroyed many lives. But the extent of misery, waste, and destruction suffered as a result of the cocaine, crack, and other drugs that freely transverse our borders will not be stopped through any just say no rhetoric, unless the government says no first.
They could shut the borders of this country down tomorrow morning so tight that not 1 gram of cocaine could get inside this country.
The lives of those involved with the train deaths have changed. While Russell Welch was working on his Mena Airport investigation, he was slowly poisoned with anthrax through a series of tainted letters sent to his office. He nearly died, and his kidneys and immune system were almost totally destroyed. He is retired from the force. Jean Duffy was publicly defamed and her career ruined by Dan Harmon and the local press, despite the credible evidence she was gathering with her task force. She now works as a high school teacher. As for Kevin and Don and their families, tragically, there is no amount of money or justice that can ever compensate for the loss of a child.
The only thing I'm interested in is my son's murder on August 23rd of 1987, and I just want his killers brought to justice.
A mother's grief has led us down the path of discovery. Though we may never know who was directly responsible for the deaths of the Ives and Henry boys, we're confronted once again with a larger and perhaps more pressing question. How do we respond when our government, be it local, state, or federal, turns a blind eye toward and even becomes a party to corruption? Though we've searched tirelessly, we've found no answer to this question in the Phenomenon Archives.
I'm Harry Smith from NBC News, and I speak up for kids because some of the problems that kids have can be confounding. They can be baffling, bewildering, overwhelming. And it's hard to know where to go to ask for help. It's hard to know what's a real problem, what's not so much a problem. We urge you to find out the answers to those questions, some of the things that are baffling you right now. And the way to do that is to contact childmind.org/speakup.
whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong, I gotta be me. I gotta be me. What else can I be but what I am? I want to live, not merely survive. And I won't give up this dream of life that keeps me alive. I gotta be me. I gotta be me. The dream that I see makes me what I am. That faraway prize, a world of success, is waiting for me if I heed the call. I won't settle down, won't settle for less, as long as there's a chance that I can have it all. I'll go it alone, that's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. I gotta be free. I've gotta be free. Daring to try to do it or die. I've gotta be me. I'll go it alone. That's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me.